Okay. Let's start working with some overexposed images. Here's what I have for overexposed. If you look at the sky in this photo, that's overexposed all over the place. That's terrible. All those images I thought looked pretty bad, overexposed. So let's work with them. I'm going to go to the develop module with the first one. And if it's the image as a whole that has the problem, it would be exposure. But in this case, I don't think it's as a whole because I like 80% of the picture. It's only the sky that I don't like. So if it's isolated to the bright or dark parts of the image, remember that would be highlights or shadows. I'm going to bring highlights down because that's the part I don't like. Bringing it down darkens it. That much better. If I want more shadow detail, I could go to shadows, but I think showing the detail around that arch just distracts you. I want you to look into the distance. So I'll bring it down a bit. Fine-tune exactly how bright that is. And then if I want to control the difference between that dark and the bright, that's what contrast does. I can increase that difference or decrease it. Depends on the image. If you bring it down too far, usually it looks kind of boring and dull. So I only bring it down when it's an extreme case where the highlights and shadows are just so greatly different that it's hard to deal with. Let's do another one. Image as a whole looks pretty bright, so I'm going to bring down exposure until the image as a whole starts looking a little more normal. Around there. I might want to see just a little bit more in the shadows in here, so I can bring up shadows. Control how much detail I have in that area. If I want sky detail or I want detail in the headlamp, that would be the highlights, so I can bring that down. With all of these sliders, moving to the left will darken, moving to the right will brighten. And then if I want to control difference between bright and dark, it's contrast. If I want more of a difference, or I want less. Sometimes with overly contrasty ones, you just need to bring contrast down a little bit. All right. So let's go back. I'm typing letter G to go back to the grid. That's just what I'm used to using. I've got this image selected. I'll hit develop. Now this image is similar to the one I just adjusted. And so I don't want to start from scratch doing everything I did to the other image. So near the bottom of all my adjustment sliders is a button called previous. That means why not grab the settings from the previous image that you had just finished adjusting. If I hit that, it just stole the settings from the previous image I adjusted, plopped them on this one. And so now I might just fine-tune the image. I'll look at my histogram. I don't see a spike or a gap on the left. On the right might be the tiniest gap, which means the white slider I could try to use. But otherwise, I just might fine-tune it a little. Maybe this one needs to be just a littlest bit darker overall. So I'll bring exposure. Anytime you think overall, it means exposure. I can also change between images. I don't have to go to the library to do it each time. I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard. Arrowing will just let me go through my images. All right, let's try this one. Overall, a little bright, so I'm going to bring down exposure. Once I bring it down, now the problem is isolated to the bright areas. That's highlights. We'll bring it down. I look at my histogram, and I see a gap on the right. See a small gap? If it's on the right, it means to adjust the whites. If it's on the left, it means to adjust the blacks. It doesn't mean that it absolutely needs it. It just means it might help. So try it. In this case, I don't know that I'm going to notice. Yeah, I don't really notice, so it doesn't really matter. But in some images, like the waterfall, it will, because the most important part of the image might be the really bright areas, and if they're not close to white, it can look kind of dull. And so when I'm done and the image is looking overall okay, it's the ends of the histogram I glance at. That tells me if I want to adjust whites or blacks. Then I can adjust contrast, which is the difference between those bright and dark. Sometimes it needs to go up or down. All right. The image as a whole is a little bit bright, so I'll bring it down. But then once I get to about here, it's mainly the highlights, the really bright areas. So I'll bring down brights. You can see there's a formula kind of to this in that I'm always going for exposure if it's overall, and then highlights or shadows. Can't get this dark enough with highlights. It's not dark enough. So I would possibly